according to Mark.
Glory to you, Lord Christ.
The apostles gathered around Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place all by yourselves. Rest a while." For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a deserted place by themselves. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they hurried there on foot from all the towns, arrived ahead of them. As he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion for them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. He began to teach them many things. When they had crossed over, they came to land at Seminarian and moored the boat. When they got out of the boat, people at once recognized him and rushed about that whole region and began to bring the sick on mats, wherever they heard he was. Wherever he went, into villages or cities or farms, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. All who touched it were healed. Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
May the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing and acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer.
Amen.
Please be seated. I wonder what it was like to be in one of the crowds that day. We have a kind of goofy gospel reading today. The lectionary actually gives us the beginning of one story and then the very end of a different story in the Gospel of Mark, and it slams them together. It entirely skips over two of Jesus' most famous miracles, the feeding of the 5,000 and his walking on water. And so we get this interesting reading where we're not put face to face with the greatness of Jesus' miracles, but with the greatness of the crowds that followed after him. And I think today we're meant to think about a different aspect of Jesus' ministry. Here we don't see so much Jesus' great spiritual power, though that's there in the healings. We're also put face to face with Jesus' great social power. So that makes me wonder, what was it like to be in the crowd that day? As someone with fairly severe social anxiety, I can't actually imagine that being in the crowd felt all that great. Honestly, the thought of being surrounded by 5,000 people seems more like hell than meeting the Lord of Heaven. The crowd is where all of my inner anxieties and insecurities just bubble up to the surface. I feel like everything I do is on display, but I'm not actually being seen by anyone. The crowd for me is not a safe place. So it makes me wonder, what was it like to meet Jesus in the crowd? I wonder how people got to be in that crowd in the first place. Shortly after I got here in my placement, a few of my friends down in DC invited me to come down to the Pride Parade with them. And I had never been to a Pride Parade. They were really excited, so that got me excited. The only thing I had to compare it to was the Durham Pride, which, since it's in a small southern town, was effectively just a cookout on Duke's East campus with lots of colorful balloons and where pants were optional. I thought that sounded pretty great. So I was excited. The only problem was that I had to preach that Saturday. So I told them, I can't come, I can't do it. But after some gentle, friendly chiding, they convinced me to rush down to the metro after service and come see the end of the parade with them. And I have to say, as I was on that train, that excitement began to build. I just hadn't experienced something like this before. I looked across the aisle and I saw a young teenage girl with a set of paint, and her boyfriend next to her was begrudgingly allowing her to adorn his face with rainbows. I wanted to know their story. I wanted to know why they were so excited. I wanted to know who they were coming out to celebrate that day. And then as I got closer to the parade, closer to DuPont Circle, as I walked down the street, I started to see flags in every business window. Some had streamers and banners and all manner of other decorations. And I began to wonder, is this authentic? Is this real? Or are these businesses just trying to make an extra buck off the crowds? So I became curious. And as I got even closer, I saw people dancing in the streets, wearing flags as capes and just waving them around with pride. I wanted to know, what was the cause of their joy? What was the freedom that they were celebrating that day? And I wonder now, that's what it was like that day in Galilee. I wonder if there was anyone there that day who joined the crowd because they overheard the whispers of their neighbor adorning their partner with the message of good news. I wonder if there was anyone there who was simply curious as to why their butcher and their baker were leaving their shop fronts behind to follow after this strange new rabbi. I wonder if there was dancing. And I wonder if that excitement was infectious, that it captured the hearts of even the people who were intimidated by that energy, captivating them with the hope of peace, healing, freedom. I wonder if that's what it was like that day in Galilee. And I wonder if that energy, that excitement, began to disappear. I wonder if it faded slowly as people began to feel their feet aching after miles of walking in the desert. I wonder if it faded as they felt their stomachs turn with hunger, unsure of where their next meal was going to come from. But I also wonder if it evaporated, just like that, disappearing the second they realized they were in a desert place, a strange place they had never seen before, surrounded by a mob of faces that they had never seen before. I wonder if their hearts began to pound and their arms grow stiff at their sides, like mine did when I got to DuPont Circle. I wonder if they were like me, suddenly being surrounded by a swarm of people they had never seen before. My head started to spin. I didn't know where I was or anyone around me, even though I had been there 1,000 times before. I was overcome by sensory overload. My eyes started to dash from place to place. I couldn't focus on one thing for more than a second because there was always someone new bumping into me on either side. My nostrils were filled with the smell of sweat and smoke. And my ears were ringing with the sound of music, the thunder of the parade, and the murmur of 1,000 conversations that I couldn't make out. All those stories that I wanted to hear on the train and on the streets, all those faces that I wanted to know, just blurred together into this anonymous mass. And I was confused and lost. And so with my arms by my side, I began to weave through the crowd, just telling myself it'll be okay. It'll be okay. It'll all be okay. Just find your friends, you're gonna be okay. I'd bump into people and I'd say, sorry, bumping into them and just looking down again, telling myself I'll be okay. Then the panic set in even worse when I found out I'd have to cross the parade to get to the side of the street my friends were on. And so I began to pace back and forth, muttering to myself even louder at this point. I looked like a freak. I looked at a freak in my rumpled church clothes, talking to myself while all the rest of the crowd were dancing and shouting in splashes of color. And I wonder if that's what it felt like to be in the crowd that day. I wonder if there was anyone there on the shores of Galilee who felt all their personality just begin to leak out of them. All of their wit, their charm, their presence, their joy, just sucked right out of them by the mob, to the point that they couldn't even cross the street without having to talk themselves up. I wonder if people felt lost and alone and scared. And I wonder if that's what Jesus felt when he had compassion on those who were like people. I wonder if Jesus' heart was breaking for someone like that. But there's more. Sure, the crowd is a place of internal chaos and anxiety, but it's also a place of real risk, real vulnerability. After I had finally mustered up the courage to cross over the parade, I was making a beeline for my friends who were just a block away, or a couple blocks away at this point. And as I did, an older man passed me by. And as he was passing by ever so subtly, he slipped his hand into mine and caressed the inside of my palm. It was just a second's touch, but it replays like hours in my head. I had never been touched like this by a stranger before. I'd never been violated by this. I was already freaking out by the thought that I'd just bump into a random dancer on the street. But this was calculated. This was intentional. This was aggressive. And my skin began to crawl. Half of me just wanted to whip around and pummel him there in the streets right there. The other half of me just wanted to sit down and break down, finally admitting defeat to the crowd. I ended up doing neither. The adrenaline kicked in, and I just kept weaving through the crowd even faster with my arms clenched even more tightly by my sides. And as I began to pace even faster, I began to wonder. I wondered what would possess a person to touch a stranger like that. I began to wonder if this is what women experience on the streets every day of life. And I began to wonder if I was truly safe. And now I wonder if that's what it was like. I wonder if following Jesus wasn't so much of a joy or a privilege, but a real risk, going into a truly dangerous place. And I wonder just how dangerous that crowd actually was. We know the man in the middle had good and godly intentions, but can we really say the same about the 5,000 other men that swarmed around him that day? And I wonder if there was anyone there who was petrified by the thought that instead of leaving seen and healed, they'd leave limping away. violated, objectified, and even more broken than before. I wonder if that's what it was like in the crowd. And with all this swirling around in my head, I did finally reach my friends just as the very last float was passing by. The crowd immediately began to dissipate, and I really did feel a sigh of relief. I had finally made it. The crowd was gone. But there I was, sweaty in my rumpled church clothes, while my friends were there decked out in color and glitter and smiles. And I couldn't help but feel like something magnificent had passed me by, and I was just standing there in the wake of trampled beads and mud-caked confetti. And I think that might have been the worst feeling of all. The feeling that I had arrived just one moment too late. That I had been in the same place as my friends, but I had not seen what they had seen. I had not gotten to experience what they had experienced because my fear and my anxiety and my weakness and my doubts and my insecurities had blinded me to it all. And I couldn't help that if I had just pushed through all of that, if I had just pushed through the crowd a little bit faster, I could have seen something great. I wonder if there was anyone there that day who felt the same way. I wonder if there was anyone there who felt like they were always arriving at life just one moment too late. That all of their insecurities and their failings and their weakness kept them from seeing the world as God had made it to be for them. And I wonder if there was anyone there who saw the crowd like me as that almost unbearable place where all the world's brokenness just seems to resound like the only truth that's left in the world. I wonder if that's what the crowd was like. And I wonder if they could have experienced God in any other place. I wonder what it would be like if they had just decided to stay home that day. I wonder what joy they would have missed out on if they hadn't let that hope of healing and peace captivate their hearts. I wonder what they would have missed out on if they hadn't pushed through the crowd, pushed through that anxiety, that fear, their insecurities, and their brokenness, to come to the end of the crowd, not to reach an empty street, but to come face to face with the one who sung the stars into existence. To look up into his eyes and receive a look of compassion that says, I see you. I love you. I know you. I wonder if they even realized who it was that everyone was clamoring over, even as his eternal life was flowing into them and stitching them back together from the inside out. I wonder if he was the reason for their bravery, the bravery that it took to reach out and touch the one who is love, to touch the one who is so overflowing and abounding in grace that simply to graze the edge of his garment means that broken things cannot help but be made right. I wonder if that's what it was like to experience Jesus in the crowd. And I wonder, I want it to be healed. Amen.